Are these Browns, these new-look Browns, all sexy on paper, Super Bowl contenders?
Yes, they are.
I am a Browns fan. Like all Browns fans, we have constantly had to watch this organization shoot themselves in the foot week in and week out. Since some of our most memorable moments over the last 20 years include throwing bottles at refs and celebrating a winless season, I've decided to go over the most embarrassing moments in Cleveland Browns history. As an added bonus, I will be accompanied by the legendary YouTuber UrinatingTree. Mr. Tree has some of the best sports content on YouTube, which includes Haters Guides, total roasts of organizations, and the famous series This Week in Sports Ball. For this video, Tree will be ranking each of these moments on a tier list of ever-increasing embarrassment. I'm going to turn it over to him now to explain the tiers before we dive into the video.
Thanks, man. Let's give a brief rundown of the tiers that will be donning these horrible moments in Browns history. The fact is that such misery should be highlighted by men that once led the way. The bottom tier will merely be things that are deflating but nothing truly worrisome. These things can happen to any fan base. This is the Chris Palmer tier, the first coach of the Browns that led them through their first 2 seasons before being fired. The fourth tier will be those moments that have you questioning the sanity of this team. Stuff that can be either awkward or painful to watch will be here. The usual lowlights of a team season frequent this, the Rob Chudzinski tier, a former top coaching prospect who was the first hire of Jimmy Haslam's reign. He was inexplicably fired after a 4-12 season and his career never recovered. In the middle, we have the stuff that lingers, the things that are very difficult for any fan to live down. These are what most people point to when laughing at a team. Here is the Eric Mangini tier. Mangini, a man who was a terrible hire from the get-go. He learned nothing from his time with the Jets and was fired in 2 seasons. Coming in second are some of the most humiliating moments for any team to be a part of. Stuff that's locked away behind years of bitter memories and a sense of regret. Kind of like hiring a head coach who has never been a head coach at any level before. What can go wrong there? It's the Freddie Kitchens tier. Finally, we have the stuff that can't be hidden away. It's the core identity of every fan. They can't overcome it. Every time they see it, they are still broken. These are the kind of things that anyone might never recover from. Thus, we rightfully call this the Hue Jackson tier. Enough said.
The Browns were a consistent playoff team during this decade. However, 3 gut-wrenching losses defined this era, all of which have their own nickname. In 1980, with a minute left inside the red zone, it was second down at the 13-yard line and the Browns were only down by 2. All they needed was a field goal, but instead of playing it safe, they decided to go for the end zone.
9 seconds to go. Into the end zone. Was it intercepted? Oakland intercepted the ball.
The Raiders would go on to win the Super Bowl that year. With 5 minutes left in the AFC Championship, the Browns seemed destined to reach the Super Bowl after the Broncos botched the kickoff return.
A critical mistake by Gene Lang.
Starting at their own 2 and needing a touchdown, John Elway led an incredible 98-yard drive to tie it up. The Broncos would go on to win in overtime. Then, the following year was the much-anticipated rematch. This time, Cleveland had to put together a drive of their own to stay in the game. After getting all the way down to Denver's 8-yard line with just over a minute left, this happened.
Draw to Biner. Ernest Biner. Fumble the ball, and Denver has recovered. Oh my!
Yeah, these losses still hurt. Especially since Cleveland hasn't made it this far since these defeats, you can make the argument that they never recovered from these wounds. Although I will say with time passing, these losses have gotten a smidgen more tolerable. Just a bit. That's why these are in the Kitchens tier.
Speaking of disappointing, money talks and nothing is sacred. Such is the state of pro sports in the 90s. The Browns are indeed moving to Baltimore and what amounts to a $50 million signing bonus to Modell for moving.
Art Modell had been the Cleveland Browns owner since 1961. He had his fair share of controversial decisions made as the owner, but nothing compared to when he decided to move the franchise to Baltimore beginning in 1996. The final Browns home game was a sight to behold.
85, and we look at that pile of seats they've thrown over the edge there.
Pretty much all the fans held a grudge against Art Modell for the decision he made.
You know what? We'll get another team and we'll go to the Super Bowl before Art Modell does.
Even though Cleveland eventually got a team in the form of an expansion franchise, the original team that moved to Baltimore and changed their name and logo won the Super Bowl within 5 years.
Unlike those playoff games, there is absolutely no recovering from this. Having a team ripped from you due to a greedy owner is one of the worst things a fan can experience. He took their team, their players, and their rivalry with the Steelers. Even worse, in Baltimore, the Ravens would have both stability and success while Cleveland watched. And nothing stings a Browns fan more than having to see Art Modell lift up the Lombardi Trophy. This is definitely Hue Jackson tier.
I want to send a message to everyone who ever made fun of Cleveland. A message to anyone who ever told a Cleveland joke or laughed at a Cleveland joke. You can now officially shut up!
In a much anticipated return to the NFL, the new Browns expansion franchise was to be featured on ESPN's Sunday Night Football versus their rival, the Pittsburgh Steelers.
For these fans, the table is set. The long wait is over. Their Browns are back. Touchdown.
Reminiscent of when Alabama plays a team like Mercer, the Browns got absolutely pummeled. Not only was the score bad, but the Browns only gained 40 total yards compared to Pittsburgh's 464. The rest of the season was a struggle too, as the Browns went on to finish 2-14.
This was embarrassing, but it was still only their first game as a team. There are going to be some bumps in the road. Expansion rules were restrictive for the Browns, and there wasn't much talent to go around. Just like the guy that coached them, this is going into the Chris Palmer tier.
This is serious stuff here in Cleveland. This is a playoff spot potentially on the line.
In a 2001 regular season game now known as Bottlegate, the referee crew broke the rules when they decided to review a game-deciding play after another play had already been ran. Not only that, but they took over 5 minutes to come up with a decision. By that time, the stadium had turned into total chaos.
The fans got to stop throwing crap. We just saw a guy get hit in the head and he's down, split his head wide open. The fans have got to control themselves. People are getting hurt. It's ridiculous. You're only hurting yourself by throwing stuff on the field.
Due to the dangers of all the bottles hailing down towards the field, the refs called the game then and there. Then the league forced the players to come back out 20 minutes after the fact just to run one more play.
One gentleman sitting in front of us was hit in the head with a Walkman or a CD player.
I'd laugh at Browns fans, but their actions were completely justified. That review shouldn't have happened, and the entire affair was handled as poorly as possible. Their reaction would have occurred anywhere. Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Green Bay, they would have rioted too. Of course, it had to be Cleveland, so it's just another stinging reminder of a wound that doesn't go away. Thus, it's in Mangini tier.
4 seconds remaining. Browns looking to hold on. 39-37.
On opening day during the 2002 season, the Browns found themselves all but guaranteed to win against the Chiefs. It was the last play of the game, and the Chiefs had to throw a Hail Mary to have any chance of winning.
37. Green takes the snap. Green steps up. Under some heat. He got rid of it. And Tate is forced out of bounds at the 25.
The game should have been over right then and there, but it wasn't. Browns linebacker Dwayne Rudd had taken off his helmet and thrown it, thinking he had just sacked Trent Green. But the play wasn't over yet.
Sportsmanlike penalty. Number 57 Cleveland threw his helmet during the play. It's a tack-on penalty, half the distance to the goal.
This player in the NFL, 30 yards away. Anderson, he nails it.
They preach the same thing from the time you start playing in Pop Warner. Pay attention to what's happening on the field. It doesn't matter if the clock hits 0, if a whistle isn't blown, you keep playing. The helmet toss is the ultimate worst-case scenario. Not only costing them the game, but doing it in such humiliating fashion. Then again, I wouldn't call it terrible by Brown standards, but merely Chudzinski tier bad.
The Cleveland Browns selection is from the University of Kentucky, quarterback Tim Couch.
Tim Couch was drafted number 1 overall to the Browns in 1999. With a lack of production on the field, fans were getting more and more frustrated as time went on. Early during the 2002 season, after being booed throughout the game, Tim Couch would suffer a concussion. It was met with cheers from Browns fans.
On the ball and got hit in the back of the head, and next thing I remember, the fans were cheering when I'm laying on the field hurt, and I think it's to be honest with you, I've laid it on the line for this team in this city, and for them to turn on me and boo me in my home stadium is a joke. It's a joke to me, and I've worked my ass off here, and it's hard to take, man. It is.
If anything, you should be blaming the Browns for giving him nothing to work with for years. The team destroyed his confidence and wrecked his development from the start. Still, it's a bad look to cheer for a player being injured, let alone your own guy. This is Chudzinski tier.
We talked about they got talent on the outside for the Cleveland Browns, but didn't expect them to be shown off this much.
Even among a shaky start to the 2002 season, the new expansion Browns had finally found their groove. Head coach Butch Davis managed to lead the Browns to the playoffs in his second season. Again, the Browns found themselves playing their rival Pittsburgh, who had beaten them twice earlier in the year. But this game seemed to be different. Amazingly, the Browns had gone up 24-7 midway through the third. Even better, they were up by 2 scores with just over 3 minutes remaining.
Dennis Northcutt. Touchdown. The Steelers will rush. Well, they have 2 down linemen and now a third. Holcomb throwing. Complete inside the 30-yard line. Looking for the out-of-bounds marker, and he got there. No.
This was supposed to be the moment the Browns were to be reckoned with again. Instead, it became another symbol of Pittsburgh using Cleveland as a punching bag. Dennis Northcutt isn't at Andre Rison levels of infamy, but he's up there. Agony's name for the day, Chris Fuamatu Ma'afala. Easily in the kitchen's tier.
It lives in warm, moist areas, but staph can quickly become a staph infection once the area is exposed.
Joe Jurevicius was a free agent signing whose childhood dream was to play for the Browns. His reward after 2 seasons of play was a staph infection that effectively ended his career. He needed 5 surgeries to clean it out and would go on to sue the organization afterwards. Kellen Winslow Jr., one of the highest profile tight ends in Browns history, had it twice. He accused the Browns of asking him to cover it up. But perhaps the most notable player was LaCharles Bentley. He was another local product who was the biggest free agent signing of the new Browns. He suffered a devastating injury on the first play of training camp. His patella tendon was only made worse by, yes, a staph infection. Bentley would never play another down of football again and went on to sue the Browns for their role in enabling it. 6 players over the course of 5 years were infected. That's all that needs to be said.
The Browns medical team had a huge black eye on it during this time, and most of it was due to enabling Staphylococcus to spread in the rehab facilities. To be fair, viruses of that nature are incredibly difficult to eradicate, but they should have taken better measures to make sure their players couldn't get it. The Buccaneers also had this issue flare up over the next few years, but considering who this virus infected, that's what makes this hard to swallow. Mangini tier pain.
With the 22nd pick in the 2014 NFL Draft, the Cleveland Browns select Johnny Manziel.
After receiving a text from Manziel that he wanted to wreck the league in Cleveland, the Browns traded up to draft Johnny Football. Manziel was the backup to Brian Hoyer throughout much of 2014. Even with Hoyer playing well, fans still desperately wanted to see Johnny play. Even though the Browns got off to a 7-4 start, they would lose 2 games in a row. And with playoff hopes on the line, they decided to make the change to Manziel.
Back to throw, looking, and it's going to be intercepted. Stepping up, in trouble, gets away, slings it end zone, in traffic, intercepted by Jones. All right, Pam, we will see here. Looks like a little zone read, and that's going to go for maybe a loss.
Robert Manziel entered rehab a facility last Wednesday. According to his advisor, quote, Manziel knows there are areas in which he needs to improve to be a better family member, friend, and teammate.
Manziel would have a disappointing showing in 2015, which would end in injury. During the season finale for the Browns, Manziel was nowhere to be seen. That's because he went to Vegas to party. He was released by the Browns after those 2 horrendous seasons.
What makes this worse is that the Browns spent over 6 figures for a research firm to analyze who the best quarterback of this class was. They recommended Teddy Bridgewater. Manziel always struck me as a guy who would be drafted way higher than he should be because of his name, and the Browns fell for the bait. At least Johnny Football would be a Hall of Famer if partying were a key trait to success. Total disaster. Mangini tier.
Travis Coons will attempt a 51-yard try.
The 2015 season was a nightmare, but at the end of the day, if the Browns can at least beat the Baltimore Ravens, that's a huge win. With 3 seconds left and the game tied up, the Browns had a chance to win with a walk-off field goal.
Kick on the way. No, it's blocked. The Ravens got it. Live ball. Will Hill picks it up, running near sideline. He's got blockers. Browns 40, 30, 20, 10. One man to beat. Touchdown, Ravens.
Browns really love being pantsed at home against their old team, don't they? This was good for a laugh or six when you first saw the highlights, but this is what Cleveland has to experience. A team that's terrible at its worst and frustratingly bad at its best. Sadly, I don't think this one even makes their top 10 in terms of most painful losses. That's depressingly Chris Palmer tier.
The Cleveland Browns select Justin Gilbert, defensive back. The Cleveland Browns select Trent Richardson, Barkevius Mingo.
From 2011 to 2016, the Browns' first-round picks were off the charts in the wrong direction. 8 first-round picks, and every single one of them ended up being a bust. It's uncanny how good the Browns are at picking bad players, or ruining promising ones' careers.
2 words. Justin Gilbert. He's one of the biggest busts in Browns history, but he's been mostly ignored because of all the lights on Johnny Football. Or would you rather me talk about Corey's second team Coleman? What about Birmingham Iron legend Trent Richardson? They at least got a first-round pick for him, which they promptly wasted in trading up for Johnny Football. The best-case scenario for these picks were underachievers. This is a main reason why the Browns are awful. Freddie Kitchens tier easily.
So for the dog pound, for our players, I am really pleased to introduce Hue Jackson as the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns.
After a poor 2015 season, the Browns ran out yet another front office. They decided to bring in Hue Jackson and the Moneyball front office to try to get ahead. Instead, they barely managed to win a single game in 2016. Hue Jackson would make a claim that he would jump into Lake Erie if they didn't win more than 1 game the next year. Well, the Browns would go winless in 2017. Following the 0-16 season, Browns fans would have a parade voicing their frustrations with the team. Even after nearly 2 decades of struggle, the Browns had hit an all-time low. Amazingly, Hue didn't get fired. Instead, he was given one more chance. But after another brutal start to a season, the Browns finally let him go midway through the year. His coaching record in Cleveland is one of the most shameful things you'll ever see.
I never understood why they allowed Hue Jackson to be brought back after the 0-16 season. There were a lot of instances where Jackson's coaching was the reason why the team lost. The game planning was shoddy, DeShone Kizer was left out there to be ruined, he constantly blamed other people for his own mistakes, and the fanbase regressed to gallows humor. There was no vision whatsoever. They acted like they were going on the NFL's process only to try and overpay for A.J. McCarron at the deadline. Everybody kept laughing at the Browns. To think you could have had Sean McDermott over him, but Jimmy Haslam overruled another recommendation. It was bitterly awful pain that still lingers to this day. I have to be ironic with this one and put it in the Hue Jackson tier.
Nothing tells the story of the modern-day Browns better than these 2 stats. The Browns have only managed 1 winning season since 2003. It's so bad that last year's 7-8-1 season was worth celebrating in Cleveland. It's hire a new regime, fail, fire the regime not long after that, rinse, repeat. The names fade in and out like pages in a book. The quarterback carousel has been a source of shame for years.
Remember the jersey with the names of every single Brown starting quarterback on it? It may have been retired, but it's the symbol of their seemingly endless futility. No matter what happens, their quarterbacks, coaches, and executives fail. Every time. There's a reason why the Browns are called the Factory of Sadness. All of this encompasses it, and it's on display every Sunday. It's one of the main causes of their suffering. Easily in the Hue Jackson tier.
Now you go to Cleveland, and they don't have the best players in the league. You're going to be asked to carry...
I'll stop you right there. Have you seen our roster?
Since the Browns have returned to the NFL in 1999, they have never received the amount of hype like they did in 2019. With all the talent in the world, Cleveland became a popular choice to win the Super Bowl among bettors in Vegas. Even the media had hopped on the bandwagon.
Are these Browns Super Bowl contenders?
Yes, they are.
But after getting blasted by Tennessee on opening day, the Browns have struggled to be even decent, let alone winning the division. With OBJ on pace for his worst statistical season, the Browns allegedly botching his groin injury, Myles Garrett's obscene act, Baker Mayfield regressing, and the complete debacle of the Freddie Kitchens experiment, this season has been insufferable for Browns fans like myself. This was supposed to be the year that all the suffering was over, yet this might be the most painful one yet.
I must admit I was one of those that thought the Browns had a chance to be great, although I felt they had an equally good chance of being this as well. They were a volatile team to predict. So many new pieces and moving parts, a head coach who has never coached taking control of a situation that a seasoned veteran would find challenging. So many alpha male personalities and mouths to feed on both offense and defense. To think that Cleveland is this much talent and they still might not get over that 500 hump? It may finally be the thing that breaks this fan base. For the meantime though, I'll be ironic again and put this in the Freddie Kitchens tier.